with mental health supports. So the team is looking at that to determine what we can provide centrally for our schools regarding mental health support. So we are in the process of revisiting that. Trustee Bustamante Adams, we know with multi-tiered system of support, we support our students academically, social emotional well-being, and behavioral growth. We know that if our students are not mentally healthy, that they are going to struggle with their academics. And so we are revisiting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Bustamante Adams. Trustee Cavazos.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Barton. Thank you, Mr. McCartan. Thank you, Dr. Scadal, for the presentation. As always, it is appreciated. I want to go back to, let's see, slide 13 on the challenges. I made a little note here that as far as, when you were talking about the challenges presented by the middle school data, that you were addressing that kind of like individually and in small clusters. What do those small clusters look like?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Cavazos, thank you for the question. So we really look at a number of things, but we have schools that are within the same high school feeder alignment, and if we're seeing data trends for that, we'll deal with those schools kind of together. But again, every school is different, every school population is different, but when there is a chance to combine and kind of get more bang for our buck in our interventions, we do that, but it's usually through feeder alignment with one high school.
Constituent question. I was pretty sure I knew the answer to that. This next one, does the restorative leadership teams at the schools, of course, and you talked about the trainers. What are these, again, constituent question, what do these teams look like? Who are they comprised of, and how do they differ at the different levels? There's a lot of curiosity about that, and I think it's a fantastic idea.
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Cavazos, thank you for the question. So when we established the restorative leadership teams, each school principal identifies either a teacher leader or school-based leader, and to lead the restorative practices, implementation, and training at the school. So this person could either be a teacher, it could be an out of classroom licensed staff member, it could be a support staff, it could be someone from that's part of the CSM. Anybody in the school could be a part of the restorative leadership team. And for a school to meet restorative focus, we also need to include parents and students as a part of the restorative leadership team as well. So that's identified on the rubric that we use to assess the implementation effectiveness, and it's part of the training that school staff receive.
Thank you. Just brief follow-up. So normally, how many members are on these restorative justice teams, and they're consistent as far as on the different levels, as far as the different school levels?
Yes, usually we have 3 to 5 members on the team. And then they incrementally, with the school leadership team, administration, the trained staff, incrementally. They could be during POCs, they could be during after school time, or during time that is dedicated for planning time. So whenever a school has to identify, that's why each school does it differently, because we don't want to cookie cutter. We want a school to, utilize the time that they have to work with their staff, times that they have to work with their parents, and times for the students, so that this training can be effective and implementable for them.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I appreciate your patience for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Cavazos. Trustee Watson, and then Trustee Brooks, and then Trustee Guzman, and then Trustee Williams and TTS as well. We'll follow up with Trustee Watson and then Trustee Brooks. Trustee Watson.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for the presentation, gentlemen. My question is, you made the statement that building relationships is critical, and I couldn't agree with you more. But as we have a high chronic absenteeism and high vacancies in certain districts or areas of the community, how are we able to bridge that gap to make sure that we bring those suspensions and expulsions down How do that?
Dr. Martin?
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Dr. Mitchell. Trustee Watson, I think it's a very thoughtful question. Thinking about the vacancies that we do have and how does that impact student discipline. Right now, as far as at the systemic level, thinking centrally, it's hard to capture if that's connected. There's a correlation. We know that working with individual schools, we train discipline administrators to definitely work with teachers or even long-term substitutes that may be working with kids and having more referrals to the office, for instance. How do we help that teacher provide that support? So no trend data exists right now, maybe it's right, but the reality is we're very well aware of how to train our discipline administrators, that this is about support for the teachers, and that as we look at referrals going to the office, how do we provide more training for them that may be differentiated? So if the teacher doesn't have referrals to the office, but a long-term sub does, how do we as a team support the schools and the administration in giving that training to help with those vacancy issues that exist?
Thank you. And also, I know that the template will be changed. Just want to make sure that we continue down that path of making a different template to include gender as well. And I think that will also be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Watson. Trustee Brooks?
Thank you, Madam President. A couple things. One is, I don't know if you know this, but the governor just reallocated $200 million to youth behavioral health. I think it's really important that we recognize that we shouldn't have to do everything alone. A lot of these things happen outside of schools. A lot of these challenges that these children experience, their parents experience at home. So it's not that they get to school and suddenly they have some negative behavior. Sometimes they're having some family challenges. I think it's really important that we recognize it is increasingly difficult to educate children when you have to do literally everything else. So I'm very glad that we do have some representation from municipalities, because a lot of the challenges that that we've noticed through board service specifically is that there is not adequate infrastructure in communities. There are things that could be happening in community centers. There are resources from cities that could go to address some of these challenges that are happening within family dynamics. So I do think we have to talk about that. And then one caveat is, can you turn to the slide with the student groups? I just want to clarify the reason that we had it broken out like this wasn't because we have different expectations, but the only way you can tell that we're disproportionately disciplining Black and African American children is to look at these numbers. I think it's really clear when you start to parse out the data and you look at it. Where's the one where it was higher numbers? The total number of this is. Clarify for me, this is the number per 1,000 of students, right? Or is that the other side, right? So in a dream world, if you are appropriately disciplining children, these numbers would be pretty much in the same ballpark. Is that how they would look?
Dr. Burke?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Marcia Mitchell, Trustee Brooke, that's 100% accurate. I know that Mr. Manzi could probably paint a picture of that as well as how this was produced with the Focus 2024 plan. But
the goal is to make these numbers as similar as possible.
Yeah, getting rid of disproportionate.
Right. So that's how we can tell that our Black and African American students continue to be disciplined at a higher rate than other students. We're trying to close these gaps. So it's not that we have different expectations, it's that we want to be very realistic about whether or not there's a potential that these students might be being treated differently. So I want to just ask a question, and I know it's not on this presentation, but about your work in anti-racism and your work with addressing some of these specific challenges, because I think that ties into this.
Dr. Stavella?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Marcia Mitchell, Trustee Brooks, I would say that it's pretty accurate. during our cultural competency training, we do spend quite a bit of time in self-examination, looking at our implicit bias, stereotypes, and things that may affect or impact the decision-making of educators as it relates to students. So we do spend some time in that self-examination so that we can look in the mirror and not just in the window to ensure that we are aware and we implement actions to disrupt any type of notable biases that may impact decision-making that it leads to. So that is part of the training that over close to nearly 22,000 employees have taken already. So we're, our deadline is to make sure that this happens by June 13th of this year. But that is something that we have to consider in regards to prior to the referral process, and the restorative process also helps with that as well, because that gives us an opportunity to address those lower level incidents before they become referrals, whether it happens in the classroom or throughout the school day, or when there's a conflict between students or between adults and students. We can resolve those conflicts before it becomes a referral, before it becomes a disciplinary issue that's sent to the administration.
Thank you. I appreciate the information. There's a lot of work to do. I commend you for taking that on, because historically, these are conversations that only the district had until we started talking about it. Are these perfect numbers? Is this a perfect way to present it? No, but at least we're actually having very difficult conversations, which I think historically we steered away from. So I appreciate your work in this, and definitely looking forward to having some more in-depth conversations with my peers when we talk about reading for nothings.
Thank you, Trustee Brooks. I'm going to turn it over to Trustee Guzman. Trustee Guzman, you're in the queue.
Thank you, President Garcia Morales. Actually, Trustee Cavazos asked quite a few of my questions. I appreciate her questions. I just wanted to know about the restorative practices grant, and if we are tracking on those who have been trained versus those who haven't been trained, and if we are seeing positive results.
Dr. Barton.
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Guzman, it's a great question. Dr. Scavella is tracking all of the individuals in the district who have been trained as RLT members and culturally inclusive champions. The other important data piece sort of aligns to a previous trustee's comment regarding RMI data. How does that translate into work that we're doing on campus with those teams as well? So RMI and discipline data connected. We look at that by school. We look at all the codes regarding restorative justice tribunals, restorative justice circles, restorative discipline practices, and even Dr. Scavella has extended that to even the use of apologies in schools. So as we do this training, as they're trained, and as we track those people being trained, we are looking at those data points over a point in time.
Thank you so much. Those were my questions.
Thank you, Trustee Guzman. Trustee Williams, do you have any questions at this time?
If you don't have any questions, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Barton and Dr. Scavella for their entire team on this, because as Brooke said, it's not a system, and as you said, Madam President, we created this 2 or 3 years ago, and it is a living document that can be changed as we go through this. I just think it's important for our new members on the board to just remember that, historically, the district has kind of been charged with solving the state's problems and not only that, but even the infrastructure of our community. So it's a big task, it's a big lift, and I think that any small win we can take is just a win. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Williams. And colleagues, I'm going to jump in the queue here, and then I see given that we've all had a chance to speak, we do have one person submit a public comment. I would like to speak on public comment on this item, and then I'll come back to the members who are currently in the queue. Dr. Barton, Mr. Cartland, Dr. Scavella, thank you and your teams for and team, the work that you are continuing to do on a daily basis to help correct some of these numbers, see the progress that's taking place, and I appreciate interim superintendent's acknowledgements at the very beginning, which is that we are not where we need to be, specifically with respect to disproportionality and the acknowledgement that exists. I think to be able to, as a group here, what we're doing here today and what we have been doing as a board for the last 2 years is to fully acknowledge vulnerably, this is not where we want to be. We want to make improvements to ensure that all of our students have incredible experiences in the district, and there's a level of just awareness that exists. And I want to commend my colleagues on the board who have stuck with this work and continue to support the superintendent in this space, because the work is still ahead. We still have more to do. And I love the conversations that are being taken place about expectations and disproportionality. Ultimately, at the end of the day, like, we are working towards making progress. And I see glimmers of that. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you're choosing to do to support our students and families. That's my comment, no question. I'm going to turn it over to public comment. Dr. Beamel, are you still on? Come on up, please. We will, you know the drill. Welcome.
Good evening, Dr. Danielle Ford. The data in this report is interesting. The numbers are trending down, which is nice, but discipline is tricky. We have MBI, SISP, and behavior referrals. Once a teacher writes up a student, Infinite Campus tells us if the write-up is ever resolved. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but it doesn't give us any information on the resolution. So reports like this are helpful. Communication lines being more open at the site level might be something to think about, as teachers are often in the dark regarding the next steps once we have written the discipline notice, at least in my experience. It would be nice to see data points that include the reasons for expulsion. Is this all fighting, weapons, arson, illegal drug use, etc.? The rationale behind the why is important when talking about the next steps to stopping the behavior. Qualitative and quantitative data and explanations on why the expulsions are occurring might be helpful. The only reason students can be expelled, according to the posters in my classroom, are battery of staff, battery of student with injury, possession of weapon with threat of injury, possession of a controlled substance, and sexual assault. And even those are tricky because expulsion is not always the end result from this, and I know this from experience. This data, though, does not seem to represent that. I misunderstood this in the presentation when I was originally writing my speech because I didn't have that information. It was just presented during this presentation. I also didn't understand the key, which was also presented during the presentation. So that might be something to consider when you guys are rewriting your reports, that to actually have a key as to what the colors represent in your data, because that's like the whole next part of my speech. But he explained that, so I'm going to skip over it. I'm very curious to see what the CCSD pre-K through 12 student code of conduct will include. Will it include consequences that actually have to be followed, or are these going to be suggestions for sites to follow? Are these the new giant poster campaigns for teachers to hang in their classrooms with consequences to be ignored? Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback, Dr. Beamel. I don't see any of the comment on item 3.01. I do want to note for the record, I have colleagues in the queue. Trustee Esparza Shoppigan, you're on.
Okay, there we go. So I'm pleased to hear that we're going to be revisiting the gaps potentially for the student mental health. Thank you for that. Definitely something that we have to address that, because if our children are not well, they are definitely going to not do academically well. So it's the whole child that we have to address. 2 questions. You're a very small division, and I look at the amount of teachers that we have, and I'm going back to that because that's where we need to kind of shift our gears. I think my question is, how are we going to get to the level to support you, to be able to support them, to have that mind shift and cultural change? Implicit bias training, I think is undone. So can you give us an update on that? And then I'm going to give you the second question, which goes to the lessons learned, revised. What is the revised Clark County School District Code of Conduct going to be like high level? So first implicit bias training update, and then the Code of Conduct update.
Dr. Scavella?
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Alexa Mitchell, Trustee as part of that, start again. I want to first focus on the implicit bias training. That's part of our cultural competency training. Initially, that every staff member in the district, every employee, including substitute teachers, must take, so that we take a really deep dive into implicit bias training, all the way into micro messaging and what the impact of these micro messages, whether they're positive or negative, that have on students, how it impacts their self-efficacy, and then ultimately manifesting behavior of adults and students. So that's something that we take a deep dive in. We're actually this staff development day on Monday. We're going to do take another deep dive, even deeper into implicit bias training at one of our high schools, where we're going to spend some time with the school, really digging into implicit bias to ensure that staff has the opportunity to really examine themselves, really look at the thought process and how implicit biases are developed in the brain and how they manifest into adult action. So, and what actions and strategies and resources can staff members or employees draw onto to become more aware? And then what is that point of interruption when we are aware? So then how do we change that narrative and change those actions that we, exemplify towards students? So that's something that's really going to, I think, be great for our district, and it's going to also help us with how we interact with students that come from diverse backgrounds. The cultural competency training also helps us with understanding and knowing, being able to be confident about the different students that we serve with, knowing that there's background information that we need to know as educators, and how do we value, validate, affirm, and build bridges with our students and recognize their cultural capital, which is their cultural strength, and then at sometimes teach them situational appropriateness so that the teaching and learning process can be enhanced. So that's part of that implicit bias and cultural competency.
Dr. Burton?
Yes, thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Alexa Mitchell, Trustee as far as the dropping in the first part of your question as well. It's a small but mighty team. It definitely relies on the work of Dr. Scavella as the leader. He has a team of coordinators, but then think about also an extension of the Equity, Diversity, Education Department centrally. Culturally inclusive champions on every campus. Are there many touch points with his division as this work continues? It's about building capacities in the whole system. So while it's a small, it's a mighty team that really is working on building capacity in the field.
Thank you. Trustees for the start again. Do you have something else? Oh, forgive me, Dr. Burton. Thank you. Thank you for the cue.
Thank you for the reminder. Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Alexa Mitchell. Trustee as far as the drop again. Code of conduct. High level, we review it every year. Every school provides us feedback by January what they would like to see in a revised code of conduct. This one will be more substantial because we're putting in place the legislative requirements from last session. We'll have a strengthened restorative practices appendix as well. And I know that Mr. McPartland is also making a user-friendly document for the field. So those are just high level, just some examples of what's to come. And we traditionally bring the code of conduct before it goes to the field. We bring it as an information item on the consent agenda every time that we revise it. So that'll be coming, I believe, in June.
Thank you, trustee. Thank you, Dr. Barton. Thank you, trustee Sparta again. Trustee Cavazos.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll just make this brief as a trustee. As far as the staff, you're going to save me a lot of work here and did all that. So thank you, gentlemen, for that. I just wanted to basically thank Interim Superintendent Brenda Larson-Mitchell for the very encouraging news that the district is going back and revisiting that as far as on the mental health supports. And on my question having to do with the implicit bias, we include all employees. I know that we had started out with, some years ago with requiring that the board was also going to go through implicit bias. So that would be something that I personally would like to go back and look at because we never did finish that. We did have good intentions, but we didn't finish that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That I think that all of us should be included. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you for that, trustee Cavazos. It does remind me, I believe 3 years ago, we received members who were present at the conference here, an equity conference here in Las Vegas, participated in the bias training by Dr. Marks, I believe is his name, one of the eminent leaders in implicit bias training in our country, and really grateful that we had his presentation, but maybe it's time to bring him back and have the revenue board members of special ed training as well. Trustee Brooks.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't have additional questions, but I know that you love them, so.
I do. Would anyone wish to adopt the presentation, Mr. Brooks?
I move to accept the presentation as presented.
Thank you, trustee Brooks. Trustee Bustamante Adams.
I second that motion.
Thank you, trustee Bustamante Adams. Colleagues, we have a motion by trustee Brooks, a second by trustee Bustamante Adams. Please cast your vote. Trustee Williams.
Aye.
Thank you. Trustee Guzman.
Aye.
Thank you, trustee Guzman. Thank you, colleagues. That motion passes 6-0. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to move on to item 4.01. This is an action item. Before we open this item fully, we are asked our audience who would like to speak on this item who have not submitted a yellow card. Please do so now. We're going to begin with the presentation first. 4.01 is the notice of intent, CCSD regulation 5135.13. And Dr. Barton is listed as our point of contact. Here, Dr. Barton.
Thank you, Madam President, member of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson-Mitchell, Mike Barton for the record. For your consideration this evening, trustees, it's regulation 5135.13, notice of intent. At a high level, why is this being brought forward for consideration? It starts with Dr. Larson-Mitchell working with the executive cabinet that is also has principals on the leadership team. So if I start on page, sort of working backwards, page 4 of 4 for the regulation, really that's what we heard from principals, that in the bottom part of the draft regulation, it used to say that district will provide subsistence on the following rate schedule: breakfast $5, lunch $6, dinner $14. We definitely heard loud and clear from principals that we should revisit this and bring it to you for consideration to align with the GSA rates that are provided for travel in particular cities. So that was the major reason for bringing this forward. We also have some cleanup language in here as well. Principals have some good recommendations to consider adding. Performing arts, speech and debate. I'm on page 3 of 4 right now, but looking at performing arts, adding that. There's some lines in each of those sections that say, if held outside Clark County, at the discretion of the principal. That's important language because as we process this, we understand that there may be, we're trying to protect instructional time with that section, all of those little sections. But the principal said there may be individual circumstances where a speech and debate team may need to go more if there's a special event or the ROTC. So the principal discretion line was added to many of those sections, as you can see. So the other part that's probably of significance in the regulation draft is the idea of international travel. And as we know, as we look at all extra, and this is on page 3 of 4, section 3, sub C, all extracurricular international travel must have the approval of the principal. It lists all of the personnel, including the superintendent of schools, and then ultimately ends that section by saying the superintendent of schools may cancel or postpone international travel based on worldwide events. So trustees, the rest is really cleanup language for your consideration, but at a high level, those are the major significant changes and the reason why we are bringing that forward tonight for your consideration. Happy to take any questions. And joining me also is Ms. Pam Sloan. Appreciate her work.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Hello, Ms. Plum. Okay, colleagues, this is I'm going to offer up my colleagues an opportunity to ask questions. Otherwise, we will please jump in the queue. Otherwise, we will go to public comment. Dr. Beamel, you're up.
Oh, Tiffany Beamel for the record. This is another very interesting document. I've worked at a high school for 19 years and I've done field trips for 19 years and I never realized this document existed. How detailed and specific this document is for these specific guidelines. Why are these specific extracurricular activities singled out over all extracurricular activities? It specifically lists athletics, 1 day per season, cheer, 1 day per season, ROTC, 1 out of district travel for loss of school time, performing arts, 1 out of district travel for loss of school time, speech and debate, 1 out of district travel for loss of school time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but ROTC, performing arts, and speech and debate are actually classes for credit. Yet we have students who travel for loss of school time with clubs and organizations multiple times per year that are not listed on this paper for multiple days and even weeks of instruction lost. Why were these groups singled out over clubs like DECA, FBLA, Science Olympiad, or Student Council? It seems odd to segregate athletics, cheer, ROTC, performing arts, and speech and debate in this manner, but leave the rest. Was it an oversight? Was it intentional? Doesn't seem quite rational either way. Attendance is either important or it's not, but I can absolutely tell you that the students miss multiple weeks of school for elective clubs and organizations before they miss weeks for cheer, dance, choir, or athletics. There should also be a consideration for grade checks. If athletes must pass grade checks to participate, why don't we have the same rules for students who miss multiple days of instructions for field trips? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Beamel. Trustee Cavazos.
Thank you, Madam President. I feel that I understand where this regulation is coming from and the cleanup language and how we are clarifying certain points, because I did have a few situations this year that basically kind of fell into this kind of gray area where things need to be clarified. Would we be able to just kind of clarify how these particular categories were designated?
Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell. Thank you, Trustee Cavazos. Typically, these are considered our district sponsors. So when you think about Ms. Brim and the work that she does, Sloan, these are really our district sponsors. We know there's a lot more travel that exists, and we know that we operationalize that in many of our operational travel documents. So we wanted to ensure that the regulation for your consideration had the district sponsored student activities related travel events.
All right, do we have anybody else in the queue?
Trustee Brooks is in the queue.
Okay, I was basically going to offer to make a motion at this time to accept and approve